Our memory text for this week is one I've done before, and it's Romans 12, verses 1 and 2. I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. And be not conformed to the world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. That's a big passage, actually, and I always say this, it seems, but it's true. I could do a whole series on this, and I really can't. I have to sort of focus on one idea. The big idea, of course, is this notion of a living sacrifice, which is an interesting image that it sort of paints in your mind. Somebody has said that the difficulty with a living sacrifice is it keeps crawling off the altar. And that's true, isn't it? I mean, isn't that how we feel? Present your bodies a living sacrifice, and we do that, and we want to do that, but that living sacrifice keeps crawling off the altar. What do you do? And the answer is, right here in this text, don't be conformed to the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And I think the key to this passage is that expression, by the renewing of your mind. This is one of several places where the Apostle Paul teaches that the path to sanctification is the renewing of the mind. This is something we've talked a lot about here in Grace Life, and I love to preach on because I think it is the heart of the issue when it comes to our sanctification. It's definitely what this passage is talking about. In what sense are we living sacrifices? What is it about a sacrifice that's distinctive? And the answer is it's holy. And how are we holy? By the renewing of our minds. How are we acceptable to God, to borrow the language of this text? By the renewing of our minds. So we prove what is God's acceptable will. We're acceptable to God because of the righteousness of Christ that's imputed to us. I hope you understand that. But we prove, that is, we put to the test the acceptable will of God, that which is good and acceptable and perfect, by the renewing of our mind, by holiness in our thought life. And that's what this is all about. Not being conformed to this world. How is it that we can resist conformation to this world? How is it that we can resist letting the world sort of press us into a mold of worldliness? And the answer is to be transformed by the renewing of our minds. The warfare this describes and the struggle that Paul focuses on here is a battle that takes place in the mind. You've heard me say this so many times before. And in fact, it was the focus, wasn't it, a couple of years ago as we studied through the Ten Commandments, because one of the first and main lessons we learned as we studied those commandments and observe how they are dealt with throughout the Bible is that the law of God is given primarily to govern our hearts, not merely our external visible behavior. And some would say, well, God is not that concerned about our external behavior. He is, but the way to govern your external behavior is by the renewing of your mind first. And external behavior without mind renewal is nothing but hypocrisy. And we'll see that as we go. But you remember, as we went through the Ten Commandments, we saw that the true moral meaning of each of the commandments deals with what takes place inside of us. That which no one else can see in the arena of our minds. And Jesus taught this repeatedly. You've heard me say this again and again, but I have to say it again. This was the main point. Every time Jesus brought up the subject of God's law, this was the point he was making, that the law speaks to and commands our hearts, not just our external behavior. For example, you remember that Jesus said in Matthew 5:28, whoever looks at a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. And he was teaching that the moral restrictions put on us by the seventh commandment, and all the commandments for that matter, are aimed first and foremost at our hearts, the inward man. And so the Ten Commandments do not merely govern visible behavior. True morality is not a question of what takes place in our outward behavior alone, but genuine holiness is a state of the heart. And therefore, the law of God was given to govern the heart first and foremost, the internal person. And bringing that back into this text, you can also say that in order to be living sacrifices, wholly acceptable unto God, we have to be transformed by the renewing of our minds. That's what this is all about. The Bible teaches this from cover to cover. That's why you hear me talk about it so often. Sin is not merely a question of external actions, but the real wickedness of sin stems from what takes place in the heart. The things that defile you the most are not sinful things that you do, but sinful thoughts you entertain. In other words, it's not what you do that colors your character, but what you think about. Mark chapter 7, verses 20 through 23, Jesus said this, "What comes out of a man, that defiles the man. For from within, out of the heart of man, proceed evil thoughts, adulteries, fornications, murders, thefts, covetousness, wickedness, deceit, lewdness, an evil eye, blasphemy, pride, foolishness. All these things come from within and defile a man." Notice the list he gives there. Some of those are simply thoughts. Covetousness, wickedness, deceit. Those are obviously sins of the mind, but some of them seem to be actions as well. Thefts rather. Blasphemy. Fornications. Those are acts that you do. Jesus said they stem, first of all, from evil thoughts in your mind. He's not focusing primarily on the act of adultery or acts of theft and murder. He's talking about the thoughts that give place to such acts. And he's saying that those evil thoughts that come from within, those are what defile us the most. It's not what you do that defiles you the most. It's what you think about. And we tend to flip-flop that in our thinking and think, well, okay, if I don't actually do this evil deed, it's not so bad for me to think about it. It's not so bad for me to think covetous thoughts as long as I don't commit an act of theft. Jesus said, no, actually the thought is the thing that defiles you the most because it feeds evil desire. And that's what colors your character. And he's also saying that every evil act begins with evil thinking. Murder doesn't spring from a pure heart. It's the product of envy or hatred. Fornication and adultery are the fruit of lustful thoughts. And so whenever someone transgresses the purity of the marriage relationship or dishonors his body with an act of fornication, you can know that person entertained unrighteousness, first of all, on the inside, in his thought life. And all sin is incubated in the mind like that. Therefore, if we want to be sanctified, if we want to be holy, if we want to be true living sacrifices, our mind is the arena where the struggle must take place, where the war must be won. By the same token, the person who willfully entertains evil thoughts, someone who deliberately savors lustful thoughts in his own mind, that person will eventually commit evil acts too. The thought is the parent of the act, and you cannot keep your evil thoughts bottled up forever. Jesus said they defile the man. They defile the whole man. And they inevitably bear the fruit of behavior because a corrupt tree cannot bring forth good fruit. So let me ask you, how is your thought life? How wholesome are the secret thoughts of your heart? Did you know that that is the true measure of your character? Proverbs 23 verse 7, as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. The real you is not the person other people see. It's not the person who comes to church every other week with a smile and takes notes and tries to keep up a pious veneer. But the real you is the person only God sees. And according to 1 Samuel 16, verse 7, the Lord does not see as man sees. For man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. God judges you according to what you're really like in the recesses of your own heart. 1 Chronicles 28 verse 9, the Lord searches all hearts and understands all the intent of the thoughts.